Good morning. How's it going? So you guys are here for the turntable setup? Yeah. Awesome.
We have a substitute for Michael Fremer. I'd like to introduce Steve Silberman, Vice President of Development for AudioQuest on behalf of the LAOC Audiophile Society and the show. Let's hear a round of applause for Steve Silberman. Last year he wowed the audience with all his digital bits, and this year will be no different, I'm sure.
So good morning. Let me see here. I should probably use the microphone. I think they're recording this. So anything I do say will be used against me. So good morning. Yeah, I'm sure you can all hear me now. My name is Steve Silberman. I'm Vice President of Development at AudioQuest. I work on projects more related to computer audio than not. I'm on the DragonFly development team. If you guys has anybody heard of DragonFly? That's cool. Anybody got one besides me? Radical. The rest of you guys need to catch up. I've been enamored with computers most of my life. I was fortunate to go to a high school where computer science was a math elective. So instead of taking calculus or trig, I could learn Fortran and Cobalt and all these practical languages that have absolutely no use today. I worked in retail for about 10 years, a specialty hi-fi retail shop, and just at the transition when iTunes was coming alive and Napster had been alive, and I found all that to be very, very exciting. I thought this is the future, that physical media would eventually disappear, that storage would become inexpensive, and that bandwidth would become wide and inexpensive, and that someday, in the future, everyone would be doing computer audio. So I thought by now, us as a community, it would have been a foregone conclusion that there'd be no need for these events, these seminars. I thought by the year 2014, we'd all know how to use computers as an audio device, and we're getting closer, so it's exciting. So I want to give you kind of a lay of the land in terms of what we see happening with computer audio. You guys have heard of, has anybody here heard of iTunes? This is staggering. Tim Cook in the last quarterly stock sales, whatever they call that, the earnings report, the earnings conference call, he mentioned a number in terms of how many active iTunes accounts there are now on the planet. Now, the way that Apple constitutes an active iTunes account, it means that you've purchased something or you've downloaded something, whether for free or not, through your iTunes account in the last 60 days. So this is staggering. 800 million active iTunes accounts on the planet right now. I would say that iTunes is now the format. CD was a format, cassette was a format. He's nodding his head, no, it's not a format, but 800 million people. But almost 1 out of 7 people use iTunes on the planet today. So that's a pretty staggering number when you look at it that way. It may not be for you, but it's for 800 million people. This seems to be a very exciting year, too, in computer audio. We're hearing a lot of buzz about 24-bit, right? Really exciting. We had Neil Young do a Kickstarter, launch his company called Pono. And if I had said to you, or if any of us had said to one another a couple of days prior to that Kickstarter that the mainstream media was going to be talking about why 24-bit is important and why MP3s are terrible, if I told you USA Today and the New York Times and the LA Times and Time Magazine were going to be talking about 24-bit, you would have thought I was crazy. And then just a few weeks ago, the CEO of Sprint was on Bloomberg News talking about their new HTC phone that they co-developed with Harman Kardon that does 24/192. Imagine that. The CEO of the third largest phone company in the United States is telling people that MP3s suck. That is so radical. Isn't that great? Yeah, so 2014 is the year where everyone outside of this walled garden that we participate in becomes aware of the importance of high-resolution music, whether it be 1644, it'd be 2448, it'd be 24/192, it'd be DSD. The fact that people outside of our community now know that there's a conversation going on, it's really, really exciting. It's a really exciting time because we're going to have access to all this phenomenal music. And we're starting to see streaming services now that stream at CD quality. Has anybody heard of a site in Europe called Qbuzz? Qobuz? A couple people? Don't feel like, oh God, I'm behind again, if you haven't heard of it. They're not here in the United States yet. They'll be here in October. But in Europe now, people can pay 10 euros a month, like we pay $10, to stream 320 kilobytes per second. But people can pay 20 euros a month in Europe and stream CD quality. They can stream 1,411 kilobytes per second. So everything is shifting at such an alarming rate in the year 2014. We've got USA Today talking about 24-bit. We've got the CEO of Sprint talking about 24-bit. We've got music services offering a CD quality streaming. It's a very, very, very exciting time to be so enamored and so involved in computer audio, because all of a sudden I'm not crazy anymore. I'm normal. Everyone's speaking my language. This is really, really great. So these are the things I like to talk about because I think they get people jazzed. It gives us hope, right? That music is going to become important again. That it's not going to be fast food. So what I'd like to do today is, in spite of your hatred for iTunes, picking on you, I'm going to take you through some of the basics. I'm going to take you through setting up your computer, setting up iTunes and optimizing iTunes so you get the most out of it. You know, unfortunately, Apple never provided an owner's manual for people. So you don't know which things to select and what things to deselect. And it's actually really simple. You'd be surprised how easy it is. I'll show you some add-ons with iTunes. You might not like the sound of iTunes, but it's a very easy interface, which is why it's so successful. And there's been, good morning. Thanks for coming. Thanks. Hey, thank you everybody for coming, by the way. Sorry I didn't thank you.
I thought I was special here for a minute.
You are. Everybody's special. Everyone gets a ribbon. I'm going to show you some plugins, some add-on applications that you can use in conjunction with iTunes. A lot of people love the interface from iTunes, but they're not excited about the sound. There's a cottage industry of companies like Amara, Pure Music, Audiovana. These companies have all popped up, and they all add value in terms of sound, getting better sound using the iTunes as just an interface and not as a music player. I'll also show you an alternative to iTunes. I'll show you a product that I love called JRiver. For people who may not want to use iTunes, it's an absolutely spectacular product, and it has some features that go beyond what Apple can do or iTunes can do. I'll show you a little bit about USB, connecting your computer over USB, and I'll also show you some stuff in terms of networking, because it seems like the tides are pulling every consumer electronic product, whether it be a refrigerator and a stove and a dishwasher, or a television, a DAC, any kind of media player. Things are being pulled towards the network, the router in your home, TCP/IP, Ethernet. So I'm going to cover a lot of ground, and it always seems like an hour and a half is enough time, and it never is. So what I'd like to do is go section by section, and I'll take a pause, and I'll ask people if they have any questions. Try and keep your questions relevant to whatever topic we just covered. And don't anticipate where I'm going next, because it throws me off. It's so hard to stay on topic in my own head. So, and if you've got a cell phone, could you just check and make sure it's set to stun? Yes. So the other thing is we are a cable company. We do make cables. I don't want to turn it into an infomercial. I know you guys already know AudioQuest makes cables. Tell us something we don't know. So I'm going to predominantly focus on just helping you get computer audio up and running. I will use our products to demonstrate that things that people say don't make a difference do make a difference. But there are a bunch of other great cable companies out there worth evaluating if you haven't bought product. I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're the only company, the only product to buy. But I will show you that things do make a difference, and we'll get going from there. So I'm going to start with iTunes. Start with, does that work? Can you hear me over that now? Or do I have to pull it up? You guys can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I hate using the microphone. So iTunes, 800 million users, -1. So when you launch iTunes, when you install iTunes, it comes defaulted to the most common denominator. iTunes is presuming that you're not one of us, but you're one of the other 800 million people. And so the default, if you were going to import your CDs, would be the lowest quality possible. The import would be set to 128 kilobytes. There'd be a number of features that are turned on. There are a number of defaults that are presumed. For example, iTunes would presume that you're going to store your music in the computer on the internal hard drive. So there are all these things we need to be thinking about as we launch iTunes for the first time and as we begin to store our music and compile our music. One of the first things I would recommend is get an appropriate sized external hard drive. The internal hard drive in your computer, in all likelihood, is not going to be large enough for anyone's music collection. And in addition to that, storing your music on a drive other than the drive where your operating system and your applications are, storing your music on a drive other than that tends to lead to significantly better sound. There are a number of ways you can connect an external hard drive. In terms of this Apple computer I'm using here, and I run both OS X and I run Windows 7 on this computer. In terms of this computer, I can connect a hard drive over FireWire, Thunderbolt, Ethernet for a network-attached storage device. Did I say USB? So USB, FireWire, Thunderbolt, Ethernet. There's a number of ways I can connect an external hard drive. So you want to have an external hard drive that's appropriate, commensurate with the size of the music collection you have or anticipate having. So for example, at home I have an 8 terabyte hard drive that's got about 6.5 terabytes worth of music and movies on it. And then in addition to that, I have another 8 terabyte hard drive that just functions as a backup hard drive. So the music's a little loud over there. Anticipate this, your hard drive will fail. It's not a matter of time. I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. So in terms of whatever music that you've bought from HD Tracks or any other site, CDs that you've ripped, you need to have an insurance policy for your music. So make sure that you have a backup hard drive for your music hard drive, and make sure you're backing it up regularly. There's a number of great hard drives you can buy out there. Western Digital, Seagate, they all make phenomenal drives. If you're OCD like myself and you obsess about everything and you want to make sure that you're getting the best hard drives with the best interface, with the best warranties, with the best service, go to macsales.com. Even if you're a Windows user, there's a site called macsales.com, macsales.com. They sell the highest quality products across the board. Whatever you buy from them, you're ensured of buying the best product possible with the best support. You know, we're obsessed about the quality of all of our components. Don't shortchange your hard drive. Believe it or not, hard drives actually have an influence on how things will sound. Typically, hard drives with a large cache that read and write at higher speeds tend to sound better than hard drives with a lower cache that read and write at slower speeds. And solid-state hard drives sound significantly better than the spinning disk HDD drives like what I have here. It's just they're still not quite affordable enough for me. 8 terabytes at solid state would be about $5,000 or $6,000 still, so I'm not there. Whereas I've got, for about $800, I've got an 8 terabyte hard drive. It's come down to about, for high quality storage, it's come down to about $100 a terabyte.
A buffer, a big spinning drive, and then you have a solid state buffer.
Well, you have that in your computer. When you play on a memory, you still have a buffer, and in spite of that, you can still hear the differences in hard drives. Go figure.
Zeros and ones, baby.
I know. We'll get to that. So first thing is just where you store the music and a hard drive. I can't hear over those guys, so sorry about that.
They're going to continue playing this song, and you promised me they'd turn it down.
They're awesome people. Okay, so we're going to go into our iTunes preferences. We're going to open up our preferences, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to import settings. Now this is what Apple would leave your computer looking like. This is what your iTunes would look like when you downloaded it. AAC is Apple's version of MP3. When I click on the import using, I can look at a number of different encode methods. There's AAC, AIFF, Apple Lossless, MP3, and WAV. Apple Lossless is essentially, let's just for argument's sake, it's similar to something like FLAC. WAV and AIFF are similar to one another. AAC and MP3 are similar to one another. So let's talk about what these encoders are. There's lossy encoders, things like MP3 and AAC. These lossly encoders, they throw away your music. They compress your music down, and what's not there is lost forever. This is not what we want. This is not part of our community. Apple Lossless and FLAC, they use advanced algorithms, and I'm going to distill this down to the simplest explanation possible, so don't get hung up on the nuances of this. The way that something like a FLAC and an Apple Lossless encoder work is they look at what's common between the left channel and the right channels, and what they do, instead of having that redundancy, they just take what's common between left and right and they put it in one cup, and then they look at what's unique in left and what's unique in right, and they create, say, a cup for those things, and that's all that they move over to the file. So they're able to shrink the file down to about 50 if it's a mono file, to 57% if it's a stereo file of the original size file. So FLAC and Apple Lossless don't throw away the music, but they reduce the size of your file. And in theory, they're supposed to sound 100% identical when you restore it. AIFF and WAVE, there's no compression involved whatsoever, no lossy, no lossless. If you use an AIFF encoder or if you use a WAVE encoder, you're going to get an encoding of the file that's 100% identical to the size of the disk or the size of the download. They're not supposed to sound different. Apple Lossless and AIFF, WAVE and FLAC, these four codecs are all supposed to sound identical, but unfortunately they don't. The uncompressed file formats like AIFF and WAVE, they sound demonstrably better than either FLAC or Apple Lossless. And again, on paper, they look identical. So it's a phenomenon that we can't explain, but it's easy to hear. And you can always play around with that at home and see for yourself. So what I like to do is, because storage is so cheap, I select the AIFF encoder. I leave this setting at automatic, and automatic means whatever the bit rate and the sample rate is of the music I'm importing stays the same. It's not being changed, it's not altered. And the last thing I do here is I make sure that I have error correction turned on. Error correction ensures that I'm getting a bit perfect rip when I rip my CDs. If I turn this off, when I rip the CD, regardless of whether it's AIFF or it's Apple Lossless or it's MP3, if the disk drive gets to a point where it's having problems reading an error, it's going to skip over the error and it's going to interpolate the data that it couldn't find later on. It's going to make up the bits. If you have error correction turned on, it's going to ensure that you get a bit perfect copy, and it's going to ensure that it doesn't interpolate unless it's the absolute last resort. So you'll get a much better sounding rip copy of the original disc if you're set to AIFF and you have your error correction selected to on. And then as a personal preference, what I do is I always have import CD and then eject. Because usually I'm listening to music while it's ripping, and I can just look over and see the disc hanging out, take the next disc that I'm going to rip and put it in. So it's pretty much that simple. Then we go over to advanced, and we have to select a location where we're going to store our music. We have to tell our iTunes, we have to tell the application where we want to inventory all of our media. So you see the iTunes media folder location over here. If I were to select change, it will show me all my options. I've got my external hard drive over here. I've titled that media. So it's right there. I could select a remote disk or a boot camp. It's obvious I want to store it here. You can see all the music that's on this hard drive. I would hit open and we're good to go. That's pretty much all you need to do right there. And I would close that. The last thing that you need to do is there is a equalizer. I have to remember, they keep moving the location of the equalizer. And what's that?
It was on window.
Thank you. In equalizer, iTunes always ships this flat, but they always have it on. So do you guys remember when you buy a Yamaha or a Denon receiver and there was the tone button? Even though your tones were set to even or flat, there was the tone bypass, tone on or off. And turning it off, you could hear a little bit of an improvement in sound. It's the same thing in iTunes. You want to make sure that you deselect the on in the equalizer. Even though it ships flat, it sounds a tiny bit better if you just turn that off.
Is that on playback or when you're ripping the CD?
For playback.
Okay.
Yeah, for playback. That's it. That's pretty much all you need to do to get iTunes up and running. Really, really simple. This is why they have 800 million users. Yes, sir.
If you've already downloaded your music to Apple Lossless, and you haven't lost anything, can you move it over to AIFF?
You can. Yeah, you can. And let me show you how you would do that. So let me go back into, so let me see here. Let's look at a file. Okay, here I created 3 different versions of Blame It On Me. I've got one in Apple Lossless, one in AIFF, and then I made an MP3 version of it. You can actually use iTunes to convert your Apple Lossless to AIFF. So let's see here. Let me show you how I would do that. Let me go to Songs, and then Blame It On Me. Here's the Apple Lossless. If I click on this, I can create an AIFF version. So if I've set my encoder, because my primary encoder is set to AIFF, I could take any Apple Lossless or MP3 for that matter, but you're wasting your time with the MP3s. What will happen is the Apple Lossless folder will be opened up, and the music will be taken out, and then the raw linear PCM will be reconstructed. And then what will happen is that raw linear PCM will then be put into an AIFF folder. This is anecdotal. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a computer engineer. This is a suspicion. My suspicion is it's the resources required to reconstruct a lossless file that affect the way that it sounds. It must use more resources, and that's what I think affects the sound of FLAC or the sound of Apple Lossless. But when you reconstruct the Apple Lossless and then re-preserve it as an AIFF, it seems to work just fine.
Isn't the knock on Wave, and I'm not sure it applies to AIFF, the fact that storing and managing and retrieving metadata is more challenged with Wave or AIFF?
You're 100% identical, and I should have brought that up, and I appreciate you reminding me of that. So here's the problem with Wave. This is why you want to select AIFF. When Wave was developed, they weren't thinking about metadata tagging. Metadata is the cover art, the album title, the song title, all those little details you read about. If I rip a disk in Wave, and I go out and I ask to get the metadata, it will get the metadata, and it will be there with that primary Wave file. But when I back up my Wave files, the metadata doesn't come with it. It doesn't have the ability to hold the tag and take it with it. In AIFF, when I get all the metadata and I make a backup, all of the metadata comes along with it. And if I back up the backup and I back up the backup of the backup, it always comes along. That's the problem with Wave.
So I saw a system yesterday, it's a complete music server package, I won't do names here. But I saw a server, and they do Wave, among other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them about that question. They said Wave is the best, and they said, no, the way we manage our software and our interface,
They could modify
completely
it. Yeah.
handle the Wave thing, and they have no problem with metadata. Is
Yeah.
that possible?
They have an exception to the rule, and anything you can modify. You can modify these codecs and do what you need to do, and it sounds like they probably.
may have done.
Yeah.
Okay, but in general, if you don't have to deal with that, just go AIFF, you don't have a problem.
Exactly. Yeah. So far, so good. Okay, great. So that's pretty much it for iTunes. That's how easy and how simple iTunes is to set up. Now, when we get connected to, like, say, a DAC here, for example, we've got a USB DAC. This is both a USB and Ethernet DAC. Over Ethernet, I can do AirPlay, which is it's limited to just CD quality. If you have high-res files, AirPlay won't pass them as high-res files. But over USB, I can use iTunes, and I can use iTunes to play anything from low-resolution MP3s all the way up to 32-bit 384. iTunes has that capability. So what we need to do is, now that we've got iTunes set up, we need to think about how we're going to connect our hardware, our DAC. So in this particular case, for this scenario, I'm going to use the Pioneer here as a USB DAC. And something as a footnote here, who's using USB playback? Who's doing a USB DAC or wants to do USB DAC? Okay. If you're using a USB DAC, make sure that your external hard drive is not also connected over USB. The bus is a pretty simple device, the USB bus. Asking it to speak asynchronous USB to your DAC and bulk protocol to your hard drive at the same time is a very difficult thing for it to do. Things get congested. You get conflict in the bus. It radically reduces the performance of your system. You're better off with a NAS on the network, or Thunderbolt or FireWire or any alternative connection. But don't have your your DAC and your hard drive using the same bus. It just won't sound good.
But if it's a separate USB bus, it would be okay.
If you had a tower and you had a separate USB bus and you could confirm that, and if you had the computer aptitude, the skills and expertise to confirm that those are separate buses, then yes. But if you're buying a laptop, it's unlikely that you're going to buy a laptop that has separate buses unless it was something that you custom built. So like this Apple computer I have has 2 USB ports, but they're the same bus. Yeah. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to establish contact between the computer and the DAC. So I'll go into my system preferences and I'll go to sound and I'll select the Pioneer USB audio device. That's simple. The next thing we need to do is we need to open up what's called the MIDI in an Apple computer. And I can go through Windows for people. I'm sorry I didn't ask, who's an Apple user? Okay. Who's a Windows user? It's about a 50-50 split. Yeah. They're
Linux.
who uses both? Okay. We're outliers.
Pros and cons. Linux.
We don't. Linux is not make believe. We don't focus on Linux.
Pros and cons.
It's what's that?
Pros and cons.
Of Windows and Apple. Apple tends to be a bit easier to use, and Apple is more proactive as a company when it comes to audio. They have all of the device drivers that one needs to get audio to get up as far as you want. For example, with Windows doesn't support high-speed USB audio. So if I'm on a Windows operating system and I want to play beyond 2496, the hardware manufacturer has to write a custom driver that gets installed in the computer on the Windows operating system so that the Windows operating system can play beyond 96K. It won't do it over USB. They don't have the device driver built into it. So for example, if I bought an Ayre Acoustics DAC, you would go to their website and you would download a driver that's manufactured by a company called Thesicon. And the Thesicon driver would then install a high-speed USB device driver on top of Windows' existing USB device drivers. And that's a lot of work to ask for someone who's already intimidated by computer audio. Who here is a little intimidated by computer audio? It's okay. Yeah. Does that sound fun? You want to go download drivers and try and figure out how to install them? So that's why Apple has been so successful with audio. You got to let me go.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
You got other people get to ask questions too.
Go ahead, sir.
So to answer the question, I prefer Apple. It doesn't mean it's better. Windows is great. A lot of people love Windows. Apple, the OS X also comes with a player application, iTunes. Windows really doesn't support a player application. You know, most people in Windows use something like iTunes or JRiver or FooBar. But we'll talk about both. I'm agnostic. I think it's important that somebody who's in my role be proficient in both operating systems, and no matter how proficient you are in both operating systems, you're always going to have a preference. So, and the preference doesn't mean anything. So where was I? What were we talking about? What's that? MIDI. Thank you very much. Okay, so to show you where the MIDI is, if I were to go into applications and then go into utilities, and then I went to the audio MIDI device app setup, I click on that, and this is going to allow me to make some really interesting choices where I want sounds to go to in my computer. So there's some icons here. You see there's the little preference, happy face right here. And then there's the black speaker icon. So if you look at this drop-down screen, use this device for sound output, play alerts through this device. I don't want my alerts playing through my Pioneer DAC. So alerts could be if I have chimes from my Google email or Facebook, you get those pings and pongs. You don't necessarily want those coming through. So what I'll do is I'll tell the computer that I want, I'll select my built-in output, which are the internal speakers, and I'll go back to this, and I'll say play alerts through here. So now the alerts are not going to play through my stereo system. There's not going to be any pings or pongs or any of those sound effects I don't want. But I do want, in this particular case, I want the Pioneer to be playing back the music. So if I pull that drop screen down, you'll see, use this device for sound output. So now my operating system, the OS X, knows exactly how and where I want and why I want to play my music. The next thing you'll notice in the MIDI is your format, or what we call sample rate. This is, if I had one hang up with iTunes, it's this right here. iTunes doesn't have the ability to communicate on the fly with the MIDI and change the sample rate so that it matches the sample rate of the file that I'm about to play back. So for example, right now it's defaulted to 44,100 or 44.1 kilohertz. And if my iTunes was on random repeat and it went to play a 2496 file, it's going to convert the 96 to 44.1 because that's where the MIDI is set. It's kind of a pain in the tush if you're using stock iTunes because every time you want to play a file at a different sample rate, you literally have to close iTunes, launch the MIDI, change to the sample rate, say 96 kilohertz in this example, play your music at 96 kilohertz, and when you want to go back to playing 44.1, you would literally have to close iTunes again, open the MIDI, and then select 44.1, and then off and running again. So this is something that I'm always writing Dear John letters to the development group over at iTunes to fix. It'd be something that they could easily fix. There's no logical reason why this is this way. It just is the way that Apple operates. It's a blind spot for them currently, but I'm sure at some point in the future they may fix this. Make a footnote of this. This is one of the reasons why these add-on applications, these things like Amara, Pure Music, Audiovana, these types of products are popular. It's not just because they sound better, they resolve this issue. So we'll get to that a little bit later. Yes, sir?
Quick question. These utilities, the ones that you just mentioned,
Yes.
I always associate those with Macintosh, not with Apple. Are there equivalents for Windows? I've been using Flubar 2000.
There are, yeah, and I can show you those too. I'll be able to reboot my computer, time provided. It's now just as a footnote to this. Everything that I'm going through, if you go to the AudioQuest.com website, and you'll see on the website on the left side there's an index, a tree. You'll see one of the tabs is computer audio. If you click on computer audio, everything I'm walking through here, we have an owner's manual for this with all the screenshots that you're seeing right now for both Apple and for Windows. Yeah, so a lot of ultimately what I want to do is I want to get you guys feeling like this isn't intimidating, this is easy to do, and then when you get home you'll be able to do it on your own. And we have the tools on our website to continue this conversation. So I'm going to leave that at 44.1, and we're ready to go. And I'm going to play you some music because I would like for you to be able to hear what just stock iTunes sounds like, and maybe we can get them to turn on the music like they had promised.
That is for them to turn down.
All right. You're just so convincing, Doug. You're
I had a lot of discussion with them yesterday. They're tired of seeing it.
Can you drown them out with your speakers?
I can try. These actually play loud. These go to 11. Okay. You guys hear it? Pretty good? Okay, good. That was an AIFF file. Now I'm going to play you an Apple lossless file.
So smart, but I've seen your name. I'll probably see your name again. Millie Vanilli told you to blame it on the rain, but if you blame it on the rain, tell me what you can do again. So if all else fails, you can blame it on me. If all else fails, you can blame it on me.
I know this is hard with the music, but can you guys hear a difference between the two file formats? I see a lot of heads nodding. And did you prefer the first or the second one? First. Yeah, the first was the AIF file. I find that the lossless is a little pinched and a little agitated. Yeah. And if you look at them on paper, they measure the same. There's no measurement that can tell you what things sound like. It's unfortunate. We're not there yet in any category. So that's why I like AIFF. Now what I want to do is I want to show you how important the sample rate is. Right now I've got it set natively. This is a 44.1 kilohertz file. And I talked about the importance of having the MIDI selected properly. I'm going to turn this up just a little bit too so we drown out the guys behind us. So I'm going to start over again with that AIFF file. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the MIDI to a sample rate that's incongruent with the CD. So I'll change it to 96 kilohertz. So you can hear what happens when your MIDI's not set properly.
So smart, but I've seen your name. I'll probably see your name again. Millie Vanilli told you to blame it on the rain, but if you blame it on the rain, tell me what you can do again. So if all else fails, you can blame it on me. If all else fails, you can blame it on me.
Okay, now I'm going to change the MIDI. Now I'm going to change the MIDI to 96 kilohertz. I'm going to relaunch iTunes. And
Paris 1956, number 9 Initiative Tour. Word is out to everybody, even on the door. Madame Rashid will let you in. Welcome to the fun. Let the people tell. Sweet mellow girl, gold was red. It's a cosmic congregation. It means it not together. It's an open invitation, an existential dream of death, all looking for love.
different? Better or worse?
It's hard to tell because it's louder.
Yeah.
I've done it in all 96 big killers oversampling the CDs. It's awful.
Big space in between the two also.
I know, I'm really sorry about that. I was doing so well that I bundled that up. But yeah, I find that playing things natively tends to sound better. I prefer to do that myself.
I recently changed my mind though. Doubling to 82. My system sounds a little bit better.
Yeah, it could be system by system, and that would make more sense than 96 because it's rational
Yes.
versus irrational. So I'm going to set that back. I'm going to close my MIDI for now, and let's look at what happens when you add some of these alternative players on. So I'm going to close iTunes for a second here, and I talked about some of these alternative players. One of the players that I like them all. I have no preference over AudioVana or Amara or Pure Music. They're all fantastic. They all offer a 30-day trial. You should try any of them. I'm not going to do comparisons here today, but I do want to show you what these things can do for your sound. Well, in Windows, there is no plugin for iTunes. You don't have this opportunity on the Windows side. Nobody's developed these. Your options on the Windows side are to go to a completely different application like Jira or Fubar.
And then they
To do the same thing. So this is a program I enjoy. It's called AudioVana, and it looks like this. And it too has its own preferences and setup. So all of these programs, if you use AudioVana or Pure Music or Amara, they're all going to have a preference setup. So you'll have to do your setup for iTunes, and then you'll have to do your setup for one of these plugins. And once you've done your setup once, you don't have to play it. You don't have to mess with it again. So I go into my AudioVana, I go into my preferences, and I go to my audio system. And what I want to do is I want to select the device I want to play to, which is the Pioneer. I hit select. It tells you what the different sample rates this DAC is capable of. So it can do 44, 48, 88, 96. For some reason, it won't do 176.4. It's a limitation of the hardware. And it'll go to 192. And you'll see here it doesn't do DSD 64 or DSD 128. It's not a DSD compatible DAC. I go into my audio filters. I can use Apple's Core Audio Filter. In this particular program, they have an upscale filter from a company called Isotope, which is a company from the pro recording world. You want to spend time reading the owner's manual on this before you go ahead and use it. There's a lot to know and too much to cover in 2 hours here. The other thing I like here is what's called System Optimizer. Optimized for audio playback. You can set it to standard, high, or extreme. And then what it does is it disables applications that are constantly running in the background of your computer that eat up precious resources, and eating up those resources interfere with the sound quality. So I disable Spotlight, it disables Time Machine, and it disables the detection of any iOS devices. And then I can do the same thing in iTunes. I can make sure that iTunes is completely deactivated, so I don't have iTunes playing in the background while AudioVana is playing. And then I can disable the iTunes volume control. We don't want the volume control in the signal. And deactivating play position, I'm not sure I can hear a difference one way or the other, but I just always err on the side of if they put it in there, they must have done it for a reason, so I select it. So it's a really simple program to set up. Let's go back to just playing iTunes by itself. I'll play you a song. And then what I'll do is I'll play you a song with AudioVana, and you can tell me what you think. So this is just iTunes. This is stock iTunes.
Every day it's getting closer, going faster than a roller coaster. Love light. Every day it's getting closer, going faster than a roller coaster. Love like yours will surely come my way. Hey, hey, hey. Every day it's getting faster. Everyone's a goal and next. seems a little longer every way. Love's a little stronger, come what may. Do you ever long for true love from me? Every day it's getting closer, going faster than a roller coaster. Love like yours will.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to relaunch iTunes in conjunction with AudioQuest Plus, and I'm going to play the same song.
Is the interface the same? So you don't know that it's playing in the background, other than the fact that you launched it now.
Every
Exactly.
day it's getting closer, going faster than. Every day it's getting closer, going faster than a roller coaster. Love like yours will surely come my way. Hey, hey, hey. Every day it's getting faster. Everyone said go ahead and ask her. Love like yours will surely come my way.
I saw some heads nodding and shaking immediately. You guys hear any difference?
Oh, yeah.
Huge difference. So you get to use a very easy interface. iTunes. Who's using iTunes? A lot of people. So you get to use the interface that you're comfortable with. You don't have to relearn a new interface, and you get to use a music player that sounds spectacular. And the other thing it'll do is it'll recognize the sample rate. So if I selected a 2496 file after this, or a 24192, or any other, it would automatically change everything appropriately behind the scenes. Yeah,
That is
that's a bonus, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, if I go here, I'll go to music and songs.
Steve,
Yes, sir.
one other benefit is you can use your iPhone, you can download a remote program for free.
Yeah, Apple offers, if you go to the, if you've got a, who's iOS, who's got an iPhone or an iPad? Okay, if you go to the App Store and you just type in the word remote, you get a free app that lets you steer your iTunes from your iOS device, be it an iPod Touch or an iPhone or an iPad. Really nice feature. Really, really nice feature. I skipped over something. I gotta go back just a little bit. I forgot to tell you about some of the things you want to do in terms of the computer. If you're going to buy a computer, or if you're thinking about buying a new computer, or you're thinking about buying a computer specifically for your stereo system, which is what I've done at home, you want to max out certain performance characteristics. You want to make sure that you're getting quad-core processors, and you're getting the highest speed, highest quality processors that you're comfortable buying, comfortable spending money on. The other thing that makes a huge difference is RAM. You want a minimum, an absolute minimum of 2 gigabyte of RAM. 4 sounds a lot better than 2. 8 sounds substantially better than 4. And 16-bit sounds quite a bit better than 8 did in the past. And it's gotten so inexpensive now. In fact, Apple computers, if you buy an Apple laptop, a MacBook Pro, they come with 16 gigabyte of RAM. If you're looking at buying a new Windows computer, a lot of them are still configurable. But the more RAM you have, the better. The higher the quality of the processors you're using, the better. And then the last bit is the hard drive in your computer, where your operating system lives, where your applications live. Make sure it's a solid-state drive. Having the operating system and the applications on a solid-state drive sounds so much better than having a spinning disk drive in your computer. It's just huge. And you think about, nobody has to raise their hand, but think about, I'm sure there's a number of people, myself included in this room, who've spent over $2,500 on a CD transport at some point in their life. Think of the computer as your new transport. It's your media file transport now. So to buy a computer like this and to allocate the resources and to think of it as an audio component, go as far as you can go where you're comfortable. And whether that's at the very top or somewhere in the middle, make your decision, live with it, and don't drive yourself crazy. But all these things make a difference.
Does the Mac Mini fit that bill? I've seen a lot of stuff online about that.
I love the Mac Mini. I have one of those at home. It's nice, it's elegant, it's small. You can order them now from Apple with solid-state drives. You can order them with 16 gigabyte of RAM. The other thing that I find makes a big difference in the sound, your computer that's in your stereo system probably needs to connect to the internet, right? You want to download music. You want to be able to use applications like remote and things like that. Turn off the Wi-Fi and hardwire that computer to your network. Turning off the Wi-Fi on your computer radically improves the sound of the system. Wi-Fi is RF interference. Your computer sounds better if you've got the Wi-Fi turned off. You may need to leave the Bluetooth on because maybe you have a Mac Mini and you're using a wireless keyboard and mouse. Bluetooth causes far less interference with the sound of your system than the Wi-Fi does. If you can get your Wi-Fi out of the computer system, out of the audio chain, things sound much, much better.
Is digital out is important?
The digital out? It is. Yeah, Spinnif would be my last choice, but it may be the best choice given a particular situation. Maybe you already own a great DAC. You bought a DAC, you made an investment maybe some time ago, and you don't want to do it again. Most of the laptops, the headphone jack is both a dual-purpose analog headphone jack, and it's an optical toslink output. And if that's the connection you want to use, that's what makes sense because you've already bought equipment, go ahead and do it. You could use HDMI if maybe you have a surround sound receiver and you want to do that, you can do that as well. But the best connections for computer audio are both asynchronous USB and Ethernet. And that's just all dependent on what DAC you've bought. You know, some DACs are network-based, some DACs are local connected USB-based. It's all dependent on which direction you want to go. There's no right or wrong answer on a global level that USB is better or that Ethernet is better. It's product specific. It depends on how well a hardware designer engineered either their USB or their Ethernet. It has nothing to do with one is absolutely better than the other. Now, there are advantages to both from a logistical standpoint. What's nice about USB is a USB connected DAC shows up as a locally connected device. A locally connected device is something that I would see here in my MIDI or my sounds and devices in the Windows. A network connected device requires other software resources. It requires something like AirPlay or UPnP and DLNA. So there's a little bit more work that goes into establishing an Ethernet device over a locally connected USB device. The advantage to Ethernet is that Ethernet can go up to 100 meters. I can have a computer entirely on the other side of the house if I want. I can have my computer here, but the network attached server somewhere else, and the DAC over here. The devices they're not as restricted in terms of their location with Ethernet. So both can sound absolutely phenomenal. So I would rank USB, asynchronous USB, Ethernet at the top, adaptive USB, the top slip below that, and then HDMI below that.
Does AudioQuest make Ethernet cables?
Yes. We do. And we're doing demos upstairs. We have a room where you can actually listen to Ethernet to hear whether or not there are differences.
Okay, this one is from a system now, it's all maxed out, the whole thing. Now, you say a solid state drive, I remember when I was working with Linda, before I was switched over to Mac, I had a solid state drive. So now they make solid state drives for Macs?
They have been for years.
I didn't know that.
Again, if you want, the easiest upgrade for you to do that is again to go to macsales.com. At macsales.com, you can actually look up your particular computer by serial number, and it'll tell you what drives are specifically compatible for that computer. And then you can just order a new hard drive. Yes, sir.
What's your feeling about the use of RAID 1 regarding data redundancy?
It's great. It's fine. Yeah, that's just if that's the way you want to set it up. That's spectacular. Yeah, RAID 1 is having one box with backup hard drives and primary hard drives all in one box, and the RAID system is constantly doing the backups of your new music behind the scenes without you having to think about it. It's a really nice, elegant lifestyle choice. I use it myself.
I'm doing music in my studio, and I have a DAC that's very high end, it's off the power. And it's, my keyboards and everything I hooked up to. Now, with what you're saying here about the computer information, will that solid state help that whole process?
Yeah. Yeah, having a solid. What's that? Yeah. Yeah. Has anybody here done an upgrade on an existing computer where their internal hard drive was once a spinning disk and then their internal hard drive was in solid state? You did it. You did it in the back.
I built it specifically
And what did you find?
Speed, it's obviously noticeable.
And that's the other thing, there's less latency in finding one other thing with your hard drive, one other thing I found that makes a difference, it's a subtle difference in sound, but it's still a difference, is defragment your hard drive. Fragmented files, it's a lot more work to find the continuation of the file. A defragmented hard drive sounds better, and I just assume, I'm making this up, I assume it's less resources.
For the Mac, Steve, how do you defrag it on the hard drive?
You would go into your, you go back into utilities. So you go to applications, you go to utilities, you would go to disk utility, and you would select the hard drive.
I see it.
Yeah, and you can do, there's a defragmentation somewhere in here, but you would find it in your disk utility.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
There's also a program that I really like if you're a Mac user. There's a program you can buy for about $35 called Disk Warrior. And Disk Warrior gives you all of these utility features for maintaining and protecting your hard drives and keeping them running nicely. And it can also test your hard drive to see if there's a predictable imminent failure coming.
Can you spell it,
Disk Warrior.
Oh, Warrior.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I'm going to run out of time, aren't I? I hate this. I need 5 hours.
It was hard to get you the 2. I helped organize.
I know. I thank you. Yeah, and hey, let's give a round of applause to Doug and the rest of the group that organized this seminar. You have no idea. I mean, herding cats is an understatement. You guys did a phenomenal job. I'm gonna. What's that? More cats. More cats. Yes, sorry.
He is like pretty.
I'm going to jump out of. Has everybody heard enough about iTunes? Does anybody have any questions about iTunes?
I have one specific question on the configuration of networks.
Oh gosh.
Does it make any difference 100 base T or 1,000 versus 100?
You can get. So he's talking about the speed of switches and routers. I found that gigabit switches and routers tend to sound better than 10-100 switches and routers.
That's what I said.
But here's the thing that drives me crazy about that observation. None of the network DACs go beyond 10-100.
I know, but I use it, even if I can't do that, I use it on the backbone.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm going to go into JRiver. JRiver is a program that has existed for Windows for years, and it's recently in the last year or so it's existed for Apple. What I'll show you on the Apple side relates to the Windows side. So again, if you're a Windows, who's a Windows user? Hold your hands high, proud. Keep your hand up if you're using JRiver. Okay, put your hand up if you're using FooBar. Okay, put your hand up if you're using iTunes. What do you guys, do I see a lot? I don't see a lot of hands. What are people using on the Windows side? Using Windows Media Player?
Amara.
Amara isn't on Windows. What's that? You said FooBar? Or FooBar? Yeah, FooBar is a good program. So,
Winamp for streaming.
Winamp for streaming, yep. I think that the best recommendation, if you're a Windows user and you want to have great sounding music and you want something that's easy to navigate and manage, I can't recommend a program more highly than this program called JRiver. It manages my music just like iTunes does, but it does a whole lot more. It gives me the ability to do network audio or DLNA. It gives me the ability to stream music over the network at any sample rate, at any bit rate or sample rate, any file format. I can send FLACs, wordless, VLCs, AIFF. It's totally agnostic. It is compatible with every single known audio and video codec out there. It also gives me the ability to connect multiple local devices. So let's think about that for a second. When we were just back in iTunes, I could tell iTunes to play to only one locally connected device, meaning I could tell iTunes it could play to either this USB device or this HDMI device or this Toslink device, but not all those devices at the same time. And certainly not all those devices at the same time with different songs. So one of the things I love about JRiver is I can add zones. I could literally create another zone. I could say I want DragonFly 2. Maybe I want to have 2 DragonFlies connected to my computer, both USB DACs, and there it automatically pops up. And then I can go in and I can actually go into the setups and the configuration, and I can configure that locally connected device in an entirely different way that I configured the first device. Very, very powerful program. It automatically sees networked connected devices. So right now the Pioneer N50, it's seeing it over Ethernet. So it has the ability to do DLNA. Are you guys familiar with what DLNA is, UPnP? Who's not?
I would like,
So, you would like?
I know DNLA backwards and forwards, but I'd like a simple explanation of UPnP and particularly whether I should allow it in on the WAN.
UPnP stands for Universal Plug and Play, and DLNA stands for Digital Living Network Alliance. And there are two applications or two stacks that are somewhat mutually tied to one another. So UPnP is more of a hardware-based application. Universal Plug and Play means zero configuration. So when I launched JRiver, I didn't have to go out and tell it to find that Pioneer N50. It found it on its own. That's what UPnP allows. It allows hardware to speak to one another. UPnP is the hardware application. DLNA is the media application software. So DLNA allows JRiver to then play the music to the hardware device. So the two stacks work together. Yes?
Steve, does JRiver play on a Mac? And if it does, is it a replacement for iTunes?
We're on a Mac right now. And it's not, I wouldn't call it a replacement, I would call it an alternative. Nuances. Yeah, so if you don't like, do you like iTunes?
It's all right.
Okay, we'll try JRiver, it's a 30-day trial. So you can go ahead and try that.
It seems to me like from what you described, JRiver has more options in it than what iTunes has.
It has far more options. So it has the abilities I just described to you. The other thing it has under audio, you see I have albums, artists, all these other things. We're not connected to the internet, but it has a media browser. It has a web browser built into the music player. So if I wanted to go to Spotify or Mog or Pandora and I wanted to play that through JRiver, I can do all of that right now on the Windows side. They haven't finished that feature on the Mac side. So it's really interesting. Imagine if Safari was built into iTunes. That's what JRiver's done over here. So let's go. I kind of hit you with the highlights. Let's get into the nuts and bolts and talk about how we get this stuff to all work. Let me just reboot it real quick and then lock it up.
That doesn't happen often.
It only happens when I'm trying to do a seminar. It's the funniest thing. Or when I'm trying to show my boss something new. So let's go into playing now. I have the ability to play to this Pioneer. I can play to it either over Ethernet or I can play to it over USB. Let's talk about USB first. So let's just pretend, all right, let's change the name of the DragonFly here. Let's rename that to Pioneer USB, just so I know where I am. I would highlight that. I would then go into my options, audio device. I would then select the Pioneer USB. I would then go into my device settings. And I would make sure that it played this exclusively, meaning that JRiver and the Pioneer, when they're playing together, there's no other interference on that channel. And I would activate something called integer mode, which gives a much more direct and succinct path between the computer's operating system, the player application, and the DAC. It's an expressway, and it sounds a lot better. And that's pretty much all I have to do right there. We noticed, if you remember, that this player, for whatever reason, won't do 176.4. If you ran into something like that, you could go into your output formats, and I could say 176.4 should be 88.2, only because it doesn't do 176.4. So you have the ability to modify your outputs if you like. You could also play DSD if you want. This is something iTunes doesn't do. Is anybody here downloading DSD files? Okay, a couple people. It's fun, right? You can use JRiver to play back your DSD files. If you bought some DSD files but your DAC doesn't do DSD, you can actually tell it to convert your DSD to a like integer format. So DSD is 44.1 kilohertz times 64. So let's say that I don't have a DSD DAC, like the Pioneer isn't DSD. A rational divisible integer of that would be 88.2 or 176.4. So I would, in this particular case, if I own DSD files, I would ask JRiver to convert my DSD files to 88.2 when it's playing to the Pioneer. But again, let's talk about this local zone, this multiple zone capability. At home, because I have a home office and my job is computer audio, I have both the Pioneer N50 in my system and I have the Ayre DX5 in my system. And the Ayre DX5 does do DSD. So I would go in and I would configure my Pioneer path to convert the DSD to 88.2. But on the Ayre, I would tell it not to convert it at all because it can do that. It's again, this very powerful program, JRiver. It gives you phenomenal flexibility. So that's what you would call a locally connected device. So in locally connected devices, I have USB, Toslink, and I have HDMI, and I can do all this configuration right in here. The other thing we have built into here is a media network. So if you look here, there's this icon. This green icon is the icon for DLNA. So for a network-capable device, I can connect to all these different network devices, things like Pioneer or a Samsung television set, anything that's DLNA UPnP compliant, JRiver can play to that. Now, DLNA has been a little bit of an undisciplined organization, and it's also been a very, very difficult protocol for a lot of companies to wrap their head around. To get DLNA certification for what they call a home media appliance, something like this is a home media appliance, the only file format that a DLNA device has to be compliant with is linear PCM. It doesn't have to be compliant with WAVE. It doesn't have to be compatible with FLAC or AIFF or MP3 or AAC or Vorbis or VLC. All of those can be added by the hardware designer as an elective. But the only thing that they're required to be compatible with is just raw linear PCM. What I found with streaming devices is if I convert my files to raw linear PCM in the player application, I guarantee myself whatever files I have compatibility, and it also sounds better. So what I can do here is I can go into, we're still in our options, I go into Media Network, I go to Add or Configure a DLNA device. I've made a DLNA server for my N50. And here you see under Audio, Mode, Specified Audio Output Format, and I can select anything from Linear PCM 2016 or 24. Or I can convert it to MP3s if I wanted to. Maybe I wanted to save bandwidth playing to a tabletop radio that's DLNA compatible. But what I do is I just say, make everything PCM 24-bit, and I'm done with it. What that means is if I have a WAV file, or a FLAC file, or a Vorbis file in my library, it's being converted to linear PCM before it goes out on the network. And that way I ensure compatibility with the song, with the device. What I found with a lot of these DLNA devices is they'll be totally compatible with FLAC. They'll play FLAC from anywhere from 1644 to 24192. But if I send the same device an AIFF file, the device just crashes because the hardware designer didn't put AIFF encoders in the hardware device. JRiver resolves that problem for you. It does the decoding for you so that the hardware device doesn't have to do the decoding. Remember that all of these Ethernet connected media players are actually computers. They typically run either on some form of a Linux or some form of an RTOS, but they are computers. And they're limited to whatever the computer designer on that side of the fence did. JRiver can get around any limitations that those devices may or may not have. Yes, sir. What's that? 5 minutes. That's it. I wish I could do more. I wanted to demonstrate cables for you. We do sell cables. But like I said, you already knew that. You knew that AudioQuest sells cables. You guys came here because you wanted to know something you didn't know. So, Q&A. No, you know what? We'll do a Q&A. We're in room 1008. We're in room 1008. Do me a favor, come on up, listen to some Ethernet cables. If you don't think that Ethernet cables make a difference, or if you're curious, we have both USB cables and Ethernet cables so you can hear what they do. It's a big and exciting category for us. AudioQuest is just completely enamored, completely committed, totally in love with computers and computer audio. It's been a big part of our enterprise. It's been a big part of our education going forward with consumers and dealers. So I want to say thank you, but before we say goodbye, I would just want to ask if there are any ending questions. Yes?
Just a comment. My experience with computer audio is absolutely the same
Amen, brother. Amen. Yeah, everything makes a difference. Treat your computer like an audio component. Power conditioning on the computer makes a difference. Isolation makes a difference. Everything makes a difference. Cables make a difference. Yes, sir.
Do you have any experience with any of the plugins with these players and things like equalization?
Like what?
Or equalization?
I don't personally, but I've been to J River, I've been to their office, and they've demonstrated those things for me. So J River also has the ability to do plugins. You can add room equalizations, parametric equalizations. There's all kinds of interesting devices that actually can import into that. You can go to their forum and learn more about those. I've never personally used those. I've got Vandersteen Quattros at home that have their own equalization built into the speaker. So I've never had the requirement to do that. I have used the equalization in Amara, especially in show settings, where let's say I was using something like a Magico or a Wilson, a full range speaker that doesn't have equalization, and I know the speaker is absolutely phenomenal, but I'm not getting good integration in the room. I've used the equalization that's built into some of these players to great success. Sometimes you just need it. You in the back.
Do you have a point of view in a Mac environment about Amara versus J River?
I don't. I'm totally agnostic with that. I think you should try them and you should decide for yourself. Yeah.
When you were talking about not using USB for your hard drive and for your DAC, if you have USB 2 and USB 3 ports, are those separated?
Not necessarily. You can have a bus that does. It's a multi-purpose bus, and so you're asking the bus to speak two different languages at one time.
And it makes a huge difference.
Colossal, huge. Yeah, not subtle.
Yes, sir. Have you tried copying music from your external hard drive to an external solid-state drive and playing it back from there?
Yes.
So that works better.
Yeah, the solid-state drive. The mechanism itself sounds better. Yes. Yeah.
So a two-stage copy is just as good as.
Yeah, you're not going to lose anything. They're both the bits will be identical. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. Number one, I have a plugin for FooBar 2000 that I really like. It's called Room EQ.
Uh-huh.
I used a Samsung microphone with a curve that I think was fast.
Right.
And that made a huge difference in my room. So I really like it. It's for FooBar 2000. Hopefully there's one for J River. It's really improved from what I use.
Yeah, there are a number of plugins for J River. This gentleman's talking about an alternative to J River called FooBar, which is Windows only. We don't recommend FooBar, and it's a phenomenal product.
I don't recommend it either for most of you in the room. Only if I have a master's degree in computer science.
And that's why we don't recommend it. J River is a real company. They have real support. It's a for-profit business. FooBar is an open source platform, and you need to be a real sharp cookie with computers.
I can see how much development they've done since the last time I downloaded the trials. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Another question, briefly, and then I think we can close.
Yeah.
Is how do we decide which AudioQuest cables to buy? For example, I'm in a Best Buy, I want to buy one of your cables, and I know, or at least my opinion is, you don't have to go to the top of the line. But where do I get my bang for the buck in the lower three?
We were just talking about, it's funny, we were just talking about this morning over coffee. One of my colleagues, Stephen Mahias, who just recently joined us, asked me a similar question, and I said, we were talking about speaker cables in particular, but I think we talked about this yesterday, maybe this morning. In digital cables, our biggest bang for the buck is right in the middle, say carbon. So if you look at our USB cable line, Forest is our entry level.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Forest, then Cinnamon, and then from Cinnamon to Carbon, and Carbon is a big jump. And then above Carbon, there are only two cables. There's Coffee and Diamond. They're better. You can hear it, but the step from Cinnamon to Carbon is greater than the step from Carbon to Coffee. So and I find that across the board with all of our.
For me, so basically, I should be buying a little bit more expensive.
Carbon's great. Cinnamon's phenomenal. But to answer your question, If a friend of mine called me up and said, "What's the bang for the buck?" I would just say, "Buy the Carbon."
And same in the audio, which series?
Pardon?
The audio cables, which series?
In speaker cables, the speaker cable that just totally blows me away is this new speaker cable we made called Castle Rock,
Okay.
which is not even in the middle. It's sort of just south of the middle. It's absolutely spectacular sounding. And then an analog interconnect, depending on whether you're single-ended or balanced. In single-ended, we make these cables now. We call it Bridges and Falls series. It's the left and the right cable, but in one jacket, and that manufacturing cost allows us to give you a lot more ingredients for a significantly lower price over a conventional two-jacketed cable.
What was the name? What was the name?
The family's called Bridges and Falls, and there's about 9 cables in that family. My favorite there are Victoria and Yosemite. They're around $400 and $600 for an analog interconnect in a 1.5 meter line. But again, I don't want this to be an infomercial about AudioQuest. I really want it to be about computer audio. And if anybody has AudioQuest specific questions, come on upstairs and we'll spend all day with you. So thank you so much, guys.